I've lost both parents in the last 2 years. So you pick up on that stuff. That's the most terrible thing about being an author. Standing there at your mother's funeral, but you don't switch the author off. So your own innermost thoughts are grist for the mill. I believe it should be possible for someone stricken with a serious and ultimately fatal illness to choose to die peacefully with medical help, rather than suffer. I must have read every issue of Punch published in the 20th century, and I think in the process I picked up the true voice of English humor, that amiable, fairly liberal, laconic voice which you find in something like Three Men in a Boat. My own books drive themselves. I know roughly where a book is going to end, but essentially the story develops under my fingers. It's just a matter of joining the dots. I've always felt that what I have going for me is not my imagination, because everyone has an imagination. What I have is a relentlessly controlled imagination. What looks like wild invention is actually quite carefully calculated. I have to write because if I don't get something down, then after a while, I feel it's going to bang the side of my head off. I like writing. I get cranky when I can't. Yes, I write books back to back, and I work very hard on them. I'm glad a genre writer has got a knighthood, but stunned that it was me. An author writes a book, and that's the book at that point. And if the author writes the book again, then somehow something has gone wrong. If you see what I mean. I like being a writer. Fantasy is unit edge. You can start it in the creche, and it follows you to death. When you're all singing together, it brings things together. I know the songs that my grandfather and my father sang. I can no longer type, so I use Talking Point and Dragon Dictate. It's a speech-to-text program, and there's an add-on for talking which some guys came up with. The thing is, Discworld had been going on for a very long time, and I've written children's books as well. Usually, when people have a really big series, they franchise it, which I thought is a bit of a no-no, so I thought what I'd do is I'd franchise it to myself. One thing that writers have in common is that they are readers first. They have read lots and lots of stuff, because they're just infested with lots of stuff. That's the most terrible thing about being an author. Standing there at your mother's funeral, but you don't switch the author off, so your own innermost thoughts are grist for the mill. Who was it said? One of the famous lady novelists, unhappy is the family that contains an author. I grow as many of our vegetables as I can, because my granddad was a professional gardener, and it's in the blood. The only superstition I have is that I must start a new book on the same day that I finish the last one, even if it's just a few notes in a file. I dread not having work in progress. I think I work much harder on the children's books. I suppose I enjoy that. I find it interesting that although there are more than 30 books in the Discworld series, it is the 4 that were written for children which have won the awards. I've never been quite certain why this is. I think we are waiting for an e-book that even non-techies can be comfortable with. From my point of view, the biggest change is that I don't have to spend most of the day printing out and packaging a manuscript. I think I almost missed that. You have to have really wide reading habits and pay attention to the news and just everything that's going on in the world. You need to. If you get this right, then the writing is a piece of cake. Nothing I can say or devise, and nothing anybody else can say or devise, is going to be perfect. I was a very keen reader of science fiction, and during the time I was going to libraries. It was good, written by people who knew their science, truthfully, without over-egging it, as I often do. The library and journalism, those things made me who I am. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a writer who's writing books, and therefore, I don't want to die. You'd miss the end of the book, wouldn't you? You can't die with an unfinished book. I've often felt depressed. Everyone feels depressed. There can be no better grounding for a lifetime, as an author than to see humanity in all its various guises through the lens of the reporter for the town. There are some people who hate my guts, but that goes with the territory. When I was a kid, I read the science fiction shelves, and I read the fantasy shelves. I write books back to back, and I work very hard on them. Tolkien is eminently filmable, I think. The Lord of the Rings is intensely landscaped, but Discworld is about dialogue, which is one reason why it might be hard to film. I think the best thing I ever did with my life was stand up and say I've got Alzheimer's. I have a living will, and I have friends, and I have money, and I have hope. I read the Old Testament all the way through when I was about 13 and was horrified. A few months afterwards, I read The Origin of Species, hallucinating very mildly because I was in bed with flu at the time. Despite that, or because of that, it all made perfect sense. Nation was one that I'd have killed myself if I hadn't written it. It was absolutely important to me that I wrote it. We have been so successful in the past century at the art of living longer and staying alive that we have forgotten how to die. Too often we learn the hard way. As soon as the baby boomers pass pensionable age, their lesson will be harsher still. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Ocean is more ancient than the mountains and freighted with the memories and the dreams of time. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. Unhappy is he to whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness. It is a mistake to fancy that horror is associated inextricably with darkness, silence, and solitude. It is absolutely necessary for the peace and safety of mankind that some of Earth's dark, dead corners and unplumbed depths be let alone, lest sleeping abnormalities wake to resurgent life, and blasphemously surviving nightmares squirm and splash out of their black lairs to newer and wider conquests. If religion were true, its followers would not try to bludgeon their young into an artificial conformity, but would merely insist on their unbending quest for truth, irrespective of artificial backgrounds or practical consequences. Adulthood is hell. Toil without song is like a weary journey without an end. The cat is such a perfect symbol of beauty and superiority that it seems scarcely possible for any true aesthete and civilized cynic to do other than worship it. Personally, I would not care for immortality in the least. There is nothing better than oblivion, since in oblivion there is no wish unfulfilled. We had it before we were born, yet did not complain. Shall we whine, because we know it will return? It is Elysium enough for me, at any rate. We shall see that at which dogs howl in the dark, and that at which cats prick up their ears after midnight. I never ask a man what his business is, for it never interests me. What I ask him about are his thoughts and dreams. Blue, green, gray, white, or black, smooth, ruffled, or mountainous. That ocean is not silent. Children will always be afraid of the dark, and men with minds sensitive to hereditary impulse will always tremble at the thought of the hidden and fathomless worlds of strange life which may pulsate in the gulfs beyond the stars, or press hideously upon our own globe in unholy dimensions which only the dead and the moonstruck can glimpse. Tats are the runes of beauty, invincibility, wonder, pride, freedom, coldness, self-sufficiency, and dainty individuality, the qualities of sensitive, enlightened, mentally developed, pagan, cynical, poetic, philosophic, dispassionate, reserved, independent, Nietzschean, unbroken, civilized, master-class men. From even the greatest of horrors, irony is seldom absent.